All right, so this is Instanet Transactions. My name is Chris Peterson. I work here at the MLS. We're going to talk about Instanet this morning. We're going to look at creating a transaction, work with transaction templates. We'll talk about AuthentiSign. Real quick, just to kind of go over the handouts over there. You've got the evaluation from the Real Estate Commission because there's 2 CE credits for this morning. There's also the handout that goes through creating transaction templates, and then a handout that goes through creating transactions because we'll walk through kind of a practice transaction this morning. Before we jump in and get started to talk about Instanet and transaction templates and all that, do you guys have any questions about Instanet you want to make sure that we hit this morning? As we go through this, if you have questions, definitely ask them. I don't know what you don't know, so there are no such thing as dumb questions. Any question is a good question. So the first thing we're going to talk about is transaction templates. So what transaction templates let you do in Instanet is it lets you group forms together. So 30 years ago in the paper world, you might have had a bunch of paper contracts printed out and you put them in a folder for buyers, a folder for sellers. That's what a transaction template is. It lets you put files together, forms together. The thing to remember about the forms is that as the Idaho Association of Realtors provides the forms, the MLS doesn't. This isn't really a forms class. We're not going to talk about filling out forms or anything because I don't know anything about the forms. The less I speak about the forms, the better the Idaho Realtors feel. So we're going to talk about Instanet today. And just as a disclaimer, because you'll probably start seeing things in the near future, they're going to update Transaction Desk to a new version. And it's not going to be something you're going to have to use for probably a year, but they're going to run side by side kind of for that time period. So if you start seeing things about new versions of Instanet, that's what it's talking about. They're just going to update it. We saw a preview of it last week. Probably the biggest difference is right now when you create a transaction in Instanet, it's always based around the property. In the new version, you'll be able to link it better to contacts. So instead of just having the same contact on 15 different transactions, you could search for that contact and see all their transactions together. So at least the way they presented it to us. So anyway, if you see information about that, that's what it is. All right, so transaction templates. So when you're in Instanet, you've got the menu over here on the left. This is the system menu. You can click on the little horizontal menu on the top, and that brings up the labels. And then right down here is templates on the left side. This is where transaction templates are. And so you go here, and then there's a section that says Checklist Manager, Transaction Templates. We're not really going to talk about Checklist Manager, but just so you know what it is, it lets you create checklists, literally a checklist in a transaction. You can create them individually on transactions. Checklist Manager will let you create ones that you can copy from one transaction to another. So Transaction Templates is right here. We just want to click there. And when you go to Transaction Templates, if you see templates that are already there that you didn't create, it's because your broker can create them for your office. So a broker can create transaction templates that everyone can use. Agents can create them for themselves, which is what we're going to talk about this morning, creating those. So again, to get here, over on the left side, go here to Templates, and then go to Transaction Templates. And then to create one, and we'll see this a few different times in Instanet, you just want to click on the add up here on the top right. That lets you create a transaction template. And to create a transaction template, all that's required is the name. The name can be anything you want to give it. We're going to work with a fake buyer this morning, so I'm going to call mine Buyer Forms. And of the two handouts, this is the thin handout we're looking at right now. We'll look at the thick handout here in a little bit. And again, the name can be whatever you want. You can always come back and change it later. When you're creating a template, you also can assign it to a transaction type. And that just means that when you select that template, when you're creating a transaction, it's going to automatically choose the type that's already associated with it. So we're working with a residential buyer, so I'm going to choose the type of residential sale. You'll notice there's lots of other types of transactions there. And if you don't choose a type, then you'll just have to select that type when you create your transaction. So we have the name in there, I pick the type, and then we hit save. And so that creates the actual template, the place where we're going to put our forms. And then once that template's created, you can come here and if you need, like I said, if you need to rename it, you can. If you want to change the type, you can. Update is the save option. But then below, you've got some other things here in addition to forms that can be added to your transaction template. So we talked about the checklist manager earlier. If you have a checklist you've created, you could come here and add the checklist to your template. Contacts lets you add contacts to your transaction template. Now, the reason you might do that is transaction templates can be created for lots of different scenarios. So let's say, for example, I'm a listing agent that works with a builder, and I do, 5 or 6 transactions for that builder a year. So it might be worthwhile to create a template for that scenario. And so I could come here to contacts and add that builder as the contact to this transaction template and make them the seller. So every time I pick this template, it automatically puts that builder in as the seller. So if you were using the same contact over and over again, it might make sense to create a template for them. When I say over and over again, I'm meaning like 6, 7, 8 times a year, not just a buyer that's making multiple offers. So if it's going to be a situation where you're using the same person or people over and over again, you could add them as a contact to a template and then just choose that template every time. The other thing you can add here before we get to the forms is documents. So if you have a document that you need to use with a certain type of scenario, you could add that to your transaction template and then use it. So let's go back to that builder example. So I've got the builder who's my seller that I do multiple transactions a year with this person as the seller. And maybe they also have a document that they want people that are going to work with them as their builder to sign. And so I could come here and add that document also to that template for the builder, which would mean when I select that template, when I'm doing a transaction for that builder as the seller, that template automatically would put the builder in as the seller and pull in the document they need people to sign that are going to use them as the builder. So that's really what transaction templates are about, is facilitating putting information together in transactions. So then we get to the forms, and the forms are the reason we have Instanet and Form Simplicity. So we want to add our forms here. To add forms to our template, you just click on the plus over on the right, and then it comes up with the different form options. We would want to go to the Idaho Association of Realtors. And then because we're creating this for a buyer, a residential buyer, any form that could be used with the buyer you'd want to put in here. Now again, they're not my forms, they're not the MLS's forms, so I may not pick all the forms you would pick, but I'm going to pick a few that you would use with the buyer. So I'm going to do the agency disclosure, I'm going to choose an addendum, buyer rep agreement, maybe a buyer compensation agreement, and then we'll come down here and choose the purchase and sale agreement. And there might be other ones you would use. Those are the 5 that I'm going to pick. And in Instanet, their analogy for the physical world is the shopping basket. So you'll notice when I've selected these different forms, I've selected 5. So the shopping basket says 5 at the top, indicating I've selected 5. And then I just click add, and that will add those forms into this transaction template. So now every time I use it, those forms will be part of transactions. So I don't have to go in and find them individually and add them in. The order the forms are in here is the order they're going to be in your transaction. So maybe I want to have the buyer rep agreement right below the agency disclosure. And maybe I want the purchase and sale agreement right below that. So you can drag them in the order you want them to be in, and then when they're added to your transaction, that's what you'll see. Now, one thing to remember with the forms and the way they work on a transaction template is every year the Idaho Realtors updates their forms. And so when they update their forms, they're not automatically going to be replaced in your transaction template. So you'll just have to come here and replace them. So just want to keep that in mind. Questions or comments about transaction templates? And if you don't want to use templates, you don't have to. You can just add forms yourself. So, all right. So that's the transaction template. And we'll use that when we create our transaction here in a few minutes. So we want to click on the little dashboard icon. Looks like a speedometer over here on the left. That'll bring us back to the agent dashboard. Now, before we kind of jump in and walk through creating our transaction, we want to stop for a minute and talk about the agent dashboard. And the reason being is that transactions also have a transaction dashboard, and they work the same way. So your agent dashboard may look different than mine, and that's because you can customize how this looks. To customize how your dashboard looks, you've got this lock, unlock button, looks like a padlock over on the right, and when you click on it to unlock it, a menu drops down and you'll see a bunch of green and blue boxes. So for lack of a better way to explain them, the blue boxes are buttons, the green boxes are windows. And you can drag those down to have them on your dashboard. So I'm going to remove everything I have. You don't need to change yours, but just to show you how it works. So maybe I'd like to have right up on the top left my transactions so I can easily see them. You can also resize any of these little windows by clicking on the little green corner there. And then maybe next to my transactions, I want to have my forms. And then maybe below that I want to have documents. And then below that I want to have my recent signings. And then I'm going to add email docs, create transaction, and create signing as buttons down here. And then once you have the items here that you want, you just click on the lock unlock again. And now that's how your dashboard will look every time you log in. So the reason that can be useful is that it makes it really easy for you to see everything you want to see. And when you're working with the dashboard, you'll notice I can click on the name of a transaction. I can click on Go to Transactions. That's just like clicking on the transaction button over here on the left. So it's just another way to get to the same spot. Or I could click on a form and work on a form, or whatever I want to do. And like I mentioned, when you create a transaction, there's a transaction dashboard that lets you customize it the same way that we'll talk about as well. So we want to create a transaction, and since we're in Instanet, we'll just create it from here. We want to click on the little transaction icon over on the left. There's a little house there, and that will bring up any transactions you previously created. And then to create a new one, we want to click on the plus up on the right, just like we saw with transaction templates. So we want to click on that to create a transaction. Now, you can create a transaction when you're in Paragon and clicking on a listing as well, and that will bring up the same window, but it will populate information from the listing. Since we're already in Instanet, we're going to manually enter information, but then we'll be able to populate it from a listing as well. So the name can be whatever you want. When you create it from a listing, the name of the transaction becomes the address. The property that we're going to work with for our fake transaction today is on Placer Court. So I'm going to call my transaction Placer Court. Again, you can call it whatever you want. And then if you created a transaction template like we looked at earlier, you'll have this section here that says template. And then here you would choose your template. Now before I choose mine, you'll also notice we have a section here for type. When I choose my transaction template, the type choice is going to go away because when I created the template, I told it what type that template was. Had I not done that, I would have to choose the type as well. The type's important because that helps Instanet know where your different contacts information is going to go, where the buyer information goes, where the seller information goes, and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to come here and choose my template. And again, the type goes away because my template had a type associated with it. So then where it says import data, we want to go to select source, and that's going to be Intermountain MLS. And then because I chose it as a residential sale, it puts in residential as the property class, but you could select the property class if you didn't have that in there. And then we want to put in the MLS number. The MLS number that we're going to work with this morning is 9893-2559. So 9893-2559 is the MLS number. Where it says add me as the, we want to make sure you're in there as the selling agent because that's the role we're going to play in our fake transaction. And we want to have use wizard checked. So 9893-2559, add me as the selling agent, and use wizard checked. And when you create practice transactions like we're doing this morning, the other agent is not made aware that someone created a transaction with their property, and we're not going to send any emails to that other agent, so they won't know that we're using their listing for our practice transaction this morning. So put a name in there, make sure you have it on import Intermountain MLS, residential is the property class, the MLS number 9893-2559, add me as the selling agent with use wizard checked, and then we want to click create. And that should create our transaction for us and actually pull in the property with the address and the picture from the listing in it. Should start coming up for everybody. Is that pulling in? Good deal. Seeing some nods. Okay. So you'll notice it's got the picture in there. It's got the address. The MLS number's there. The seller's name came from the listing. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. And all the other information that's here came from the listing. So what you want to remember is you can't blame the other agent if your forms are filled out wrong. So you still want to verify information is correct. And some things when you enter them in here have nowhere to go on the forms. I think I probably taught this class 4 or 5 times putting in lot and block number until someone told me there's nowhere on the RE21 for that information to go. And so you just want to remember that not everything you put in here has a place on the forms because the Instanet wasn't created for just the Idaho Realtors. It's used all over the country. And so there are some things obviously that do get pushed over there. Like for example, the legal description came in from the listing, but maybe the legal description was wrong. It's supposed to be block 9 instead of block 8. So you could change that so that when it populates to the legal information on the RE21, it's correct. Because you want to make sure it's correct. And then as we scroll down here a little farther, we've got the list price that came from the listing. The purchase price and earnest money, those also go over to the RE21. And so I'm going to put in a purchase price in here. You can do that as well. I'm just going to use the list price. So this one is $624.9. And then earnest money, I'm just going to put in $3,000, and it will populate that also. Other things in here, I'm not sure which ones populate and which ones don't. The Idaho Realtors are the ones that determine that, so we don't have like a list of what populates and what doesn't. It'd be great if we had that. And so that's the details section. Before we hit next, down here at the bottom, I don't want to forget to mention this. If you're in the middle of the wizard, there's 5 steps of the wizard, and you need to leave. When you hit save and exit, that'll save where you are in the wizard. And when you come back to your transaction, when you click wizard up here on the right, that'll take you where you were. So that way you're back on the same step. So that's step 1. Questions about that? Okay, so we can hit next here. So then we have the dates. To my understanding, the dates don't go anywhere on the transactions. On the forms, you'd have to put those in yourself. But you can add those here if you want. Like, for example, maybe the offer is going to happen today. So I click on offer date, put today's date in there, which happens to be March 10th. Maybe the offer is going to expire on the 12th. Maybe we want to close on April 10th or something. You can put that information in there as well. So that's the dates. So we hit next. Then we have the contacts. So the contacts, it's automatically going to put you as the selling agent, your brokerage as the selling broker, then the listing agent and the listing broker in there. And then it pulls in seller information. Now people always ask, where does the seller information comes from? It comes from the listing. So you don't have to change your screens, but I've got the listing pulled up here in Paragon. And so you'll notice that on this listing where it says owner main alternate, they put in the owner's name. So that's where it gets the owner's information. Had they not put a name in there, then you would need to manually put that information in there. One way you can get that is on the listing in the MLS, there's the CRS data icon right there that brings up the tax records. And so I can come here and see that the owner is Joshua Robert Cardona, which is the name that it brought in because that's who the agent put in as the owner of the property. If you needed to edit someone that was in here, like maybe they didn't put the name in there of the seller or they put just the last name or something, you can just click there and then you can edit anything that you need. When you're working with the seller, one of the options that it has here at the top is an address tab, and then there's this checkbox that says same as property address. So if the seller's address is the same as the property, when you check that box, it'll populate that information so that on the RE21 where the seller's name is, it now will have their address. And so if you wanted to add that in there, you would just click on the name of the seller and then go to the address tab and check the box that says same as property address and then save it. And then that will populate that address for the seller later on your forms. And then to add contacts, like a buyer or anyone else you might need to add in here, there's this plus up on the right, like we've seen a few times already. So you just come here and click add, and there's a few different ways to add them. We'll add a new person here in a minute, but the create new transaction contact will let you do that. Add an existing contact lets you add contacts that you already have in Instanet. Add yourself, pretty self-explanatory, adds you in there. And then add contact from Google lets you add your contacts from your Google account. So if you're a person that enters your contacts into your phone and your phone syncs with your Google account, if you enter their first name, last name, and email address correct, you can easily pull them in here without having to go look them up. And so that's what that add contact from Google would do. So we want to add a fake buyer into our transaction this morning. And so we want to go here to create new transaction contact. The fake, because we're putting a fake buyer in here, the type needs to be buyer. But then the first name and last name can be whatever you want. Sally Seller, Joe Buyer, whatever it is. But because we're going to practice Authentisign, where it says email, you want to put in your email address. Normally, obviously, you would put in your buyer's email address, but because we don't have a real buyer and we want to practice Authentisign, you want to put in your email address. And if you don't want to use this fake buyer another time, just uncheck the add to address book. If you leave that checked, then they'll be saved as one of your contacts in Instanet. And all you need to put in is one buyer, so that way when you do Authentisign, you just have to complete it once to finish the signing. I will add 2 buyers, so that way when we go to Authentisign, I'll go through it twice. But if you have multiple people that have to sign it, in order to see the end of the signing process, they all have to complete the signing. So it's just easier if you're practicing just to do one person. So type buyer, first name, last name, whatever you want, put your email address in there, and then hit save. to save that buyer as part of our transaction. Now I'm going to add a couple saved contacts that I have. And if you have like a husband and wife or two buyers or two sellers, you just have to add them individually because that's how they're going to sign. And if you have multiple buyers or sellers, the order that you add them in is the order their names are going to be on the transaction. So I have Willie Evans first and then Charity Evans. If I needed Charity's name to be first, there isn't a way to switch their names. I would just need to come here and delete Willie and add him after Charity. So you just want to make sure they're added in the correct order, because that way when they populate the forms, it'll be the order that you want them to be in. And then anyone who might need to be sent something in the transaction, like a transaction coordinator or an assistant or another agent, if you add them as a contact, it'll make it really easy to email them, literally like 3 clicks to send them an email from the transaction. So like if you anticipate sending the title company something, add the title person in here to make it really easy so you don't have to go look up their information later on. But that's the contacts that are part of our transaction, and only the people who have a part to play on a form will have their information populated. So like if you have an assistant or a transaction coordinator, since there's not a transaction coordinator spot on a form, their name's not going to be on there. Only the people whose roles have been identified that'll be on the forms will be there. Other questions or comments about contacts? Okay, so we can hit next. Then we have our forms, and so this is where if you had a transaction template like we looked at the beginning, those forms are going to be here already. That's the beauty of a transaction template. If you're in a hurry to create a transaction, you're not trying to find all the forms you need because they're already here since you had them in your template. Now, if you didn't have a template, or if there was a form that wasn't in your template that you needed to add, then you can just click Add up here on the right, and then choose Idaho Realtors, and then select whatever form you want that you need to put in there. You just want to remember that when you add a form at this point, you're not adding it to your template, you're adding it to this one transaction. And then later on, we'll look at filling out the forms. You wouldn't do that at this point because we're in the wizard here. But all our forms are here. So then we can click Next. And step 5 is documents. So the difference between forms and documents is forms you're going to fill out. Documents you don't. Documents are read-only. They are either imported into the transaction or uploaded into the transaction. And so you'll notice we have 2 documents here. The FaxPack cover sheet, which is always there, and that's used if someone is returning a signed document and they're faxing it to you. If they use that cover sheet, it goes right into the transaction. But the property disclosure that's here, that came from the listing. So again, you don't need to change your screens, but I'll bring the listing up here that we're working with today. So I picked a listing where the agent had uploaded documents, and in Paragon, when they've done that, there's this document icon right here. And with this particular listing, the agent uploaded the property disclosure. So that was automatically pulled in to our transaction. And that's one of the big differences with Instanet and Form Simplicity, is that if the agent has uploaded documents, whether it's the property disclosure, CC&Rs, or whatever it might be, those are automatically pulled into the transaction. Now, we don't require that property disclosures be uploaded, even though probably 50% at least of listings have them. If they hadn't uploaded it, then of course you would need to get that from the listing agent to make an offer. So to add that document or any document to your transaction, you would just come up here to where it says Add, and then you can either drag and drop the document on this big blue button, or click on the button and then go find it on your computer, and then you can upload that document into your transaction. The other thing documents will do, and we'll see this after we do our signing, is when you create a transaction that has a signing as part of it, in the documents section there'll be a folder for each individual signing. So those signed documents are right back in your transactions. So they're easy to find, and they're organized by signing, so they're not all just thrown together. So that's documents. So now we have our documents here. We can go and hit Done. And when you hit Done, that brings us here to the transaction dashboard. Now before we go into forms, we want to talk about the transaction dashboard here for a minute. It works just like the agent dashboard we saw earlier. And so you've got buttons that are blue, you've got these windows that can be included. And the thing to remember if you customize the transaction dashboard is you're not customizing this one transaction, you're customizing them all. So all the transactions will look this way. So if you wanted to change how your transaction dashboard looks, again, you just click on the Lock Unlock button, and it brings up the blue squares that are buttons, the green squares that are windows. So I'm going to remove all the things that I have here and then add them back. You don't have to change yours if you don't want to. So I'm going to add the overview to be right here on the top left. Next to that, I'm going to add my contacts. Then I'm going to add my forms and my documents. And again, you can reposition them. You can click on the corner to change their size. And then at the bottom, I'm going to add my signings. And I'm going to make the AuthentiSign window twice as wide. And then I'll add a couple buttons here. I'm going to add create a signing and email docs. Now there are other green items here like title order or home warranty, and some of those things, because Instanet is provided by the State Association of Realtors, aren't things that are applicable in Idaho. In some parts of the country, brokerages use or provide Instanet, and so they might have a home warranty company they work with, or title companies they work with, and the broker enters that information in here. The Idaho Realtors don't enter that, so it's not something you're going to use. And then once you've got everything in there you want, you just click on the lock, unlock again, and now your transaction dashboard will always look that way no matter what transaction you're working with. And just like on the agent dashboard, I can come here and click on the name of a form to go to the form I want to work with, or click on Go to Forms to go to the Forms section, or I can click over here on the right side to go to the same sections. So we want to go to Forms, so I can click on Forms over here on the right, or on my little Forms window I can click Go to Forms. Both do the same thing. So that'll bring up our forms that are in our transaction. And then we just want to click on the name of a form. So I'm going to click on the RE14, and that'll open up the form editor where you would fill the form out. Like I mentioned earlier, these are not the MLS's forms, so I have no idea how to fill these out. So of course you would fill them out the way that you need to. And then when you're working with the form editor, up here across the top we have this menu. Under File, just some items to point out here. The third item down says Save, and there's two choices, Save and Save as PDF. Save saves it at Instanet so you can come back and work on it. If you do Save as PDF, that's going to download a PDF and you won't be able to edit it because you can only edit it in Instanet. Copy would let you copy it to another transaction. You can erase everything on it, add a watermark like draft or confidential. You can remove it from the transaction. You can print this individual form, or you can send it via email or a fax, which we'll talk about emailing and faxing a little bit later. And at the bottom, you have Save and Exit. Up on the top right, you also have Save and Exit. And that'll save what you're working on and exit the form editor. Fonts lets you change your font size and style. Clause lets you insert a body of text. We'll talk about transaction forms here in a minute. Pages lets you jump to whatever page you want to go to. Like maybe I want to jump to page 3, or I want to jump back to page 1. Then you can zoom in or out to change the way it looks. And then Send to AuthentiSign will let you send it to AuthentiSign to do the signing, which we'll talk about AuthentiSign here in a little bit. So transaction forms, what that lets you do is move from one form to another. So maybe I'm done working with the RE14, I've entered everything I need to, I can click on transaction forms, and that'll bring up the other forms that are in my transaction, and then I just click on the one I want to go to. So maybe now I want to go to the RE21, so it saves the one I'm working on, and then opens up the form I clicked on. So now I'm on the RE21, instead of having to exit and come back in, I'm just going from one form to the other. Now on the RE21, you'll notice it puts here the purchase price, there's the earnest money, and then we have the funds due at closing on the second page. So it does that arithmetic for you, puts that information in there. And then again, you fill the forms out the way you need to. Other terms and conditions in a multi-line field like that, this is where you can use the clause section. So we didn't look at it before, but over here on the left is a section that says clauses. You could go in and create clauses. When you click on this other terms and conditions, you'll notice add clauses right there. So if you've created a clause, or your broker has, you can just insert that information into that section of the form. So I'm going to click here on add clause. I have a clause that I entered previously, and now when I hit OK, it copies that in there. So you might have some boilerplate information or the same text that your broker wants you to use every time you do the RE21. And so if that's created as a clause, you can just easily insert that in here instead of having to go find the email it came from or the document on the server. You can just have it in Instanet and pull that in automatically. Like I said, brokers can create them for their office. Agents can create them for themselves. And then if we go down to the last page of the RA21, where it's got the buyer and seller information, there's the buyer information, Willie and Charity Evans. There's the seller information, and you'll notice the seller's address is there because I checked that box that said on the address tab, same as property, and it copied the address in there. Questions about the RA21 or the other form editor at all? All right, so we'll pretend we're done with this. Obviously, we didn't fill this out, but we'll pretend we did that. So we just hit save and exit up on the top right or under the file menu. So then that brings us back to our forms, and of course we're going to talk about Authentisign later on, but what if you don't want to use Authentisign? What if your client wants to print these out manually, or you want to print them out, or you want to send them to your clients to be able to preview them before you send it to have them sign it electronically? So like we talked about earlier, Instanet's analogy for the physical world is the shopping basket. So as I select forms, then a number will appear in the shopping basket, and then I can click on that basket to do something with them. So let's say I want to send the RE21 and the RE14 to my buyer to have them review it. So you'll notice I have those selected, and now there's a number 2 in that shopping basket. And then when you click on the basket, that comes up with some options of what you can do with those 2 forms. And in your handout, there's a really poorly drawn diagram that tries to explain what all these items mean, but luckily, you can just mouse over them and it tells you. So again, I selected the 2 forms I'm going to work with, clicked on the shopping basket, and now I can do something with them. So on the right is the trash can to delete. We probably don't want to delete these forms. But the next one is send via fax. Has anybody sent a fax in the last year? Probably not. But if you needed to, you could hit send via fax, put in the name and the fax number, and it would send these to that fax number from Instanet. Now, Instanet obviously is not a fax machine. You're not going to hear a busy signal or anything. But one thing you can do is on the transaction history that we'll look at where that is in a little bit, you would be able to see the number it was sent to. So if somebody said they didn't receive it, you could verify the number it was sent to, and then if need be, resent it. All right, so I'm gonna hit close here. Yeah.
When doing the fax, just in case
Yeah.
whatever happens, do you have to enter 9 or 1?
No. Well, no, you don't, because all it's taking is the number it's being sent to. It's not coming from your phone system or anything else. It's going to come from the server on Instanet.
Let's say you did fax somebody and now you need to get fax back.
So when you fax it to them, it includes the fax back cover sheet, so they can return it back. And if they use that cover sheet, it goes right into the transaction.
And how do you look at the fax number that is being assigned to you?
It's the same number for everybody. So on the cover sheet, there's a QR code. In fact, when we look at the documents, we'll bring it up and look at it. But it's got a QR code on it that basically assigns it to that transaction. So
Instanet can locate the originator and just send it back.
Right, yeah. So when they use that fax back cover sheet, when that comes into Instanet as the first page of the fax, it looks at that QR code and says this is the transaction it goes to. So makes it really easy. So that's faxing. The next one is email. Obviously, email happens a lot. And so to email these forms, I would just click on that envelope, and then I would enter the email information. So when we added our contacts, I mentioned that it would be 3 clicks to send somebody something from the transaction. So here are the 3 clicks. I click on the little contact card here. That brings up the contacts from my transaction. So I select the person, and I click select. So now I've got their information in there. I just hit send, and it goes. So I don't have to go look up their information, make sure the email address is entered correctly. If I have it correctly in there for the contact, it automatically puts them in there. And if I need to CC or BCC somebody, I can do that as well. I can change the subject if I want. I can add a message. It's already going to tell them how to view the documents, though. You don't have to say, click on the link to view them. It's going to say that. And then when you send it, you want to send it as a link. Attachments are a lot less convenient for people. They have to be downloaded. If they're on a not stable connection or a slow connection, it can take time to download them if there's multiple pages. And the other thing with attachments that's hard is there's no way for you to verify they're looking at the current version. If you're sending them the 3rd or 4th edited version of a contract and you send that as an attachment, they could be looking at the first one every time because they've got it on their computer or their phone 4 times. When you send it as a link, the link they click on is always the same. So whether they click on the first email you sent them or the 4th email, it's the same link, so it's the current information. And when you send it as a link, Instanet notifies you they've clicked on your link, so you're able to verify that distribution has happened. So we're going to send it as a link here. So I'm going to hit send, and then it gives you a confirmation it's been sent, and we'll be able to see in our transaction history later on that it's been sent. But now I want to show you what it looks like when they get it. The thing to remember when someone receives an email is they're not sitting here hitting refresh. I mean, it does take a minute or two for them to get it. There we go. So it says transaction desk document sent from Chris Peterson. Document sent to you. They can click on one of these documents and it comes up and they're able to view it. And if they were going to print these out and sign them by hand, once it comes up here under file, they can go to print and they could print it out. But they're able to view it. And back in my office, I'm getting an email telling me that Willie Evans has clicked on my link for the RE21, so I know that they've clicked on it. And so that's how emailing would work when you're working with the forms. And again, we'll see in the history that it'll show that it was emailed. The next one is PDF. Lets you save them as a PDF. So maybe you want to print these out, but you're not at the printer right now, but you don't want to have to log into the MLS and Instanet to download them. You can just download it right now, and then it's on your computer. Print is going to, again, combine them as a PDF, but then take you to right where you can print them. Download zip lets you download a zip file, so if you wanted to combine them to archive them or something. Copy lets you make a copy of these forms, and when you copy them, you'll notice the little icon is the document icon that we see over here on the left as well. And so that means they're going to be copied as documents, so they won't be editable wherever you put them. The originals will still be here, you can edit, but the copied version won't be editable. And then send to Authentisign would send it to Authentisign, which again, we'll talk about Authentisign later on. Questions or comments about working with the forms? All right, so we hit close here. So that's the forms. So let's go over here and click on Documents, talk about the documents for a few minutes. So when you go here to Documents, we've got two items here, the property disclosure and the fax back cover sheet. I'll click on the fax back cover sheet so we can see what it looks like. So here's the fax back cover sheet. It's got this QR code, barcode combination thing. They would fax it to this toll-free number. It uses that code to be able to assign it back to this transaction. And that's the fax back cover sheet. Again, the only time that would be used is if the person returning the documents to you is faxing them in. If they're emailing them, obviously they wouldn't do that. If they are emailing them, up here on the top right, there's actually a little contact card, and if you go here to the menu, let's go here to the contact card. Actually, I'm going to click on email upload, that we'll be able to see it easier there. So email upload, what I wanted to point out is it gives each transaction has an email address. So if they're returning something via email, you could give them that email address, and that's the address for this transaction. So like the fax back cover sheet gets it directly to the transaction, anything they email to this email address comes into this transaction. The contact card could be useful if you were sending that contact card to someone to be able to easily send things back to the transaction. So fax back cover sheet, the email address for the contact card, make it easy to get the attached documents here. And if they're emailing it, they do have to be attachments. They can't be in the body of the email. And then we have the property disclosure. So the property disclosure came in from our listing. So I'll click on it so we can view it. Unlike the forms, we're obviously not going to edit anything here. But here we've got the RE25, and there's some buttons here across the top, a menu here. The first one is Submit, and what that would do is let you submit it for review. The time you would use that is if your brokerage is using Instanet for transaction management. If they're using SkySlope or .loop or some other program, you're not going to use the Submit button because you're going to be uploading it to some other program. But if you submit it for review, then the broker will be notified in Instanet to review those documents. The next one is Copy to Cloud. That lets you upload it to cloud storage. So if you're using one of these 4 cloud storage tools, you could do that. Print, of course, lets you print it. Download to download. Authentisign sends it to Authentisign. And then we have the markup and slicer tool. And these are kind of editing tools for the document we're working with. The markup tool lets you draw or write on the documents. You're not editing what's there, but you're adding to it. So for example, if I wanted to redact something, I could redact something that's on there. Over on the right, you've got undo last and undo all. So if I hit undo, that removes it. I could draw a line, I could highlight, I could do a rectangle or an ellipse. The thing to remember with anything that you do on the form, on the document, it's going to be that way in your transaction the whole time. You could also free draw or type in text. So maybe I forgot to check a box or something. I could use the free draw or the text to check that box or whatever. And then the document markup tool, or excuse me, the document slicer tool, lets you slice pages out of the document. So maybe you have a situation where the listing agent was kind of lazy, and instead of uploading the property disclosure and the CC&R separately, they uploaded the 40-page document. And you only need the last 4 pages that happen to be the property disclosure. So you could select pages, and then you could remove them from the document. So that's what the slicer tool lets you do. And then, like we talked about earlier, when we do our signing, there'll be a section, a folder created in the documents for that signing that we do. So we'll be able to come back here and easily see that. So that's forms. Excuse me, that's the documents. A couple other things to hit before we go to AuthentiSign over here on the right. We've got checklists. That lets you create a checklist for this transaction. Again, checklists are exactly as they sound. You can create checklist items. It isn't something that I hear a lot of people using in Instanet, probably because if you're going to have a checklist, you probably want it on your phone or somewhere you can easily get to it instead of in Instanet. But if you wanted to add items here, I can just come here to add checklist item. So maybe this is going to be a document. It's the pre-approval letter, and then it'll give me a place where I can upload that document. So it's literally a checklist. Tasks lets you create tasks. Now, to me, I would say tasks and checklists are very similar. In Instanet, obviously, they have 2 different sections for those, so you could use them both if you wanted. Call logs lets you create a call log. So if you don't have a way to keep track of the calls that you're using with your client, you can come here, add a call log. Everything is required. So maybe the caller is Willie, the subject is the closing, and then whatever we need to talk about. And then when you create a call log entry, it marks it as not being dealt with. And by default, you're only seeing the ones that are not dealt with. But if you choose this to display both, when I come here and mark this as dealt with, it'll change from being red to green. And so it just lets you keep track of your call logs. If you don't have a CRM tool you're using or some other way of keeping track of those calls, you could do it here in Instanet. Then we have the history over on the right. This is the history of the transaction. So you'll notice here it says form emailed, and if I click on that, I can see that at 10:39, I emailed a read-only version of the RE14 to Willie Evans. So here I have a verification that email was sent. Now, there's not a way to verify they've received it unless you're at their email, but you can come here and at least verify the email address that it was sent to. So maybe the email address was entered incorrectly or something. I could verify that here. And so that's the transaction history. The other items here, closing services, integration, start advertising, these are all tools that are built into Instanet. The closing services I mentioned earlier, home warranty, title, mortgage. This is something that if a brokerage was providing Instanet, they might enter that information. The Idaho Realtors don't keep tabs on title companies throughout the entire state of Idaho or mortgage companies, so none of that information is here. Integrations brings up the products that Lone Wolf that owns Instanet uses. And so you could use some of their products. Because they're here doesn't mean they're free. There's going to be costs involved with most of these. Obviously, Cloud CMA is provided by Intermountain MLS, but other ones there might be a charge for. And then Start Advertising takes you to their Boost Home Spotter product, where you could go in and advertise your product, your listing. So that's the Start Advertising. Before we hop in and talk about signings and AuthentiSign, questions, comments, concerns about anything that we've talked about so far? All right. So we're going to walk through a signing. We're going to create a fake signing, and we're going to send the invitation to ourselves so that we can go in and practice it. That's why when we created our buyer, we put our own email address, and there is our buyer, our fake buyer's email address. So to create a signing, we just want to click here on the little ad like we've seen a few times already this morning. And then we want to give the signing a name. The name can be whatever you want. I would recommend having each signing have a unique name. Makes it easier to find them, but it can be whatever you want. So I'm going to call mine Offer 01, but you could again call it whatever you want. But just remember the signer sees the name of the signing. So don't put something in there that may not be pleasing to the signer. And then once you have the name in there, then you hit save, and that takes you into Authentisign. Now, Authentisign is part of Instanet. It's not a separate program, so we're in Instanet here. And when you go to Authentisign, there's two things you see: a place to add documents, a place to add participants. So we're going to add our participants first, but you could really add either one first. So when you go here to add participant, it's going to just give us some choices: add yourself, add a new person, add from our transaction, which we'll do in a minute, or add from contacts, which would be the contacts in Instanet. So we want to add from our transaction. And then it's going to bring up the people in our transaction. We want to select our buyer. When you select a buyer or seller, the default type it puts them as is a remote signer, which means they're going to get an email, they're going to click on a link, they're going to sign the documents. That's what most people are expecting. In addition to remote signer, there are two other types that a person can be if they're on Authentisign. A reviewer is someone who reviews the documents that are being signed. They don't sign anything, but they do have to go in and review them, and they either have to approve or decline the documents. So an example of a reviewer might be another agent or an attorney for the clients or your broker. The big thing with a reviewer to remember is it doesn't matter who the reviewer is, the reviewer has to review the documents for the signing to be completed. A lot of times agents have put themselves as a reviewer, and that's totally fine, but then they don't go in and do the review. And then they get frustrated when they're not getting an email sent back to them with the signed documents, and it's because they never did the review. So just remember, if you put anyone as a reviewer, they have to do the review. The other item here for a transaction contact that can be used in Authentisign is a CC. A CC, or carbon copy, would just be somebody who's getting a copy of the signed documents when they're completed. So another agent, a transaction coordinator, whoever might need to get a copy of these signed documents could be added here as a CC. So we want to make our buyer a remote signer. That's all we need to do. And like I said before, I'm going to have two signers here. So then once you have your signer selected, you'll notice they have a color next to their name. That's the color their initials and signatures will be when you're creating the signing. So if you have multiple people, then they'll each have their own unique color. And then when you're setting up your signers, up here at the top, it says Set Signing Order. And if you put your mouse on what's this, or click on what's this, it tells you what it is. What the signing order does is it makes it a deliberate signing, meaning person number one gets their invitation and they have to do the whole thing. And then when they're done, person two gets their invitation. So a couple of reasons why you might use this. First, if you're double ending, you have to use this. The buyers have to sign the offer first. The sellers can't sign it first. So it's got to go to the buyers first. Another reason you might use it is you want to make sure the reviewer is first. Because if there's an attorney reviewing the documents, of course, they should review it before it gets signed, because they can stop their signing if there's a problem. And then the other reason you might use it is if people share an email address, then if you don't use a signing order, it can make it kind of confusing when those invitations come through. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I've got some people that share an email address here. So in email programs that people use, whether it's Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, or any of their clones that are out there, they have this feature built into it called Conversation View. And what that does is when the same sender sends an email using the same subject, it puts those emails together. So if you're emailing back and forth with your friend about your lunch plans on Friday, and today's Monday, throughout the week, those emails are going to be put together in a thread, just like when you text someone. And so that's what Conversation View is. Well, the email program doesn't know that Authentisign isn't a person. It just sees the same email address sending the same subject and groups those together. And if you don't use the signing order, those invitations come at the same time. So this is what it would look like when people who share an email address get their invitation. The other thing to remember, if people share an email address, like a husband and wife, one of those people don't use email very often because they're sharing an email address. And so if they have Conversation View turned on, which is how this one's set up right now, this is how it would look. I've had people say, well, can't they turn that off? They can totally turn it off. And if they know how to turn it off, it's not going to be confusing to them because it's in the settings or the preferences in whatever email program they're using. But if you use the signing order, then the first person's invitation comes all by itself. And then the second one comes because it's not as confusing, because this is confusing, especially, again, someone whose email isn't their primary form of communication. It's not obvious that here's one person's invitation and here's the other. So if you use the signing order, the first person's comes by itself, and then the second one comes, so it's a lot more convenient for your clients. And the reason that's important is you are tech support for your clients. The MLS is not tech support for your clients. And so if you have people that share an email address and they're not able to figure out where the signing is because this conversation view is what's going on, then you're going to have to talk them through that. And so by using the signing order, that eliminates that problem. And I don't want to pick on just buyers and sellers of signers. Agents have the same problem. So when we do the Paragon classes, typically we do Paragon Basic in the morning, Paragon Advanced in the afternoon. I've had agents, and these agents are not, they're actually the same agents were in my class in the last month. But they were in my class about a year ago, and they were husband and wife together in the class. And so when the class completion emails go out, they're like Authentisign invitations. They have the same subject for every one of them, no matter what class it is. And so what happened was they got the email, and it was like this, conversation view, and they emailed me back and said, Chris, we only got one of the emails. They didn't. They got them both, but I'm lazy. I don't want to have to try to talk them through conversation view, so I just resent the other one because I knew exactly what was happening. So you just want to remember, conversation view happens to people. They don't understand it. And so whatever you can do to make it not a problem, you should do, which is why the signing order can be useful. Now, the big negative is that it's slower. And it's only slower because you have to wait for person number 1 to get done before person 2 gets their email to sign it. So if you have somebody who's in a hurry, make them person number 1. And you can come here and just drag their names and change the order. That doesn't change anything on the forms. It just changes who gets the email first. So it makes it, you have control over how that's going to work. And then before we send this off, we'll also look at another way you can stop the conversation view from happening. So we got our signers in here. So now we need to add our documents. So I go here to add document or form. And the first place it has us look is our transaction. But you could upload into the signing. You could go to your files from from Instanet in the signing. But we want to get from our transaction. In your transaction, the forms have lines because they're editable. Documents don't have lines. So I'm going to add the RE14, the RE21, and the property disclosure. And then once I have those all checked, then I'm going to hit close. And then that adds them in here into our signing. Now the Idaho Realtors, they create layouts for their forms. So here on the RE14, because I already added my signers, as I scroll down, you'll notice down here at the bottom, their initials are already here. That's from the layout from the Idaho Realtors. And then here on the RE14, and the Idaho Realtors have updated their layout, because now there's an initial in both these places. So obviously I would need to remove one of these, because I don't want to leave both these here. So I would have talked to my clients, my buyers, about which they wanted, limited dual agency or single agency. Maybe they want to use limited dual agency. So I'm going to remove the single agency ones. So I'm just going to click on those and click on the trash can to remove them. And then we've got their signatures, their initials. Now we're on the RE21 with the signatures and initials on there. And then we get to the RE25. Now the RE25 came from the listing. Now I don't know if this listing will do it. It does not. Sometimes in a perfect storm, if it's the current version of the form, which this one, you'll notice, is January 2024, so it's not the current version. If it's the current version of the form and it was filled out and signed in Instanet and Authentisign, sometimes Authentisign is able to recognize it and it will automatically put initials down here for you. This one didn't do that, and that's fine, because if they used Form Simplicity or it was scanned and uploaded, you'd have to manually add them anyway, which is what we want to talk about. So to add the initials to the bottom of this RE25 for the buyer, there's a couple ways to do it. First, if you just have one person, you just click here on initials and drag those over. And then if I wanted to add the auto date, I would drag that over. If you have multiple people, like I have, you can do that individually for both people, or I can come here to where it says all signers, and I can drag the initials just over here and then place them where I want them to be. Now there isn't a shortcut to add individual dates. I can add both dates if I want. So that puts the dates there. And then I need to add their initials here. And we'll just add both the dates. And then the last page, we need to add their initials again. And so whether you want to do them individually or together, it's up to you. Whatever works better for you. For some people, they like the simplicity of doing one at a time so they can get them right where they want. So then we get down here to the last page. We need to add their signatures. There's not a shortcut to add the signatures. So I'm just going to go first to my first person, sign here, and drag it over. It automatically brings the date. So I'm going to go to my second person, sign here, drag it over, and then move the date over. So now I've got their signatures and the dates where they go, and the initials and dates everywhere where we need those as well. Questions about dragging and dropping the stuff on AuthentiSign. Now, before we go and send it off, one other thing you could do here is I've just dragged and dropped the initials and signatures. Maybe I'd like to save that so I don't have to do it again the next time. So over on the right, where it says Layouts, I can come here to Layouts, and under Layout Options, I can go to Create Layouts. So if you've dragged and dropped signatures and initials, you can create a layout from what you've done and then use it again later on. So I'm going to hit Create Layout here. The only thing you want to create a layout for is the one you created. That's why it says New Layout Name. So I'm going to call this Property Disclosure 2025. And I'm going to put buyer just so I can make sure I know what that is. And then hit Create. And so now the next time I have a property disclosure that my buyer needs to sign an initial, I could just come here to Apply Layouts and go to the one I need to apply the layout for, select the one I created, and that will populate it with not Willie and Charity, but buyer 1 and buyer 2. So now whoever's names are there will be populated where they go. Now, on this particular form, it's only 4 pages long. It wouldn't be hard to do that again and manually drag and drop it. But imagine if you had a 7 or 8 or 9 page document that you would just drag and drop the initials to. That's a great way to save you from having to do the work later on. Save that as a layout, bring it back. Questions, comments about dragging and dropping or any of the AuthentiSign stuff we've talked about? All right, so we want to hit Next. This does not send it. When you hit Next, it comes up and gives you the way to finalize the signing. So first, you can change the expiration date. It always gives you 30 days, but you can change that if you want. You can also turn on reminders if you want to do that. Like maybe I want them to get a reminder every day. And reminders only go to people who haven't completed the signing. If they've completed it, they're not going to get a reminder. If you have someone that says, I'm getting a reminder, but I've signed everything, they haven't signed everything. They're missing something. So the reminder is going to continue to go until they do it. And then we talked about conversation view before and using the signing order. But let's say you got to this point and you're like, did they share an email address? I don't remember. If you go here to customize invites first, you can see what their email addresses are. Second, you can change the subject. So if the subject is different for both of them, then conversation view won't happen. So for example, maybe this is going to say, Willie, here, not her, here are your forms. And this one's going to say, Charity, please sign these forms. Because those subjects are different, then conversation view won't happen. The other thing you can do here if you need to is maybe they need to change their email address for this one signing. Maybe for whatever reason they need to. So I can come here, enter in a different email address, and then it's going to go to that email address for this one signing. And then when I hit save, that just saves it, and then send is what's going to send it off. So now we want to click send to send it to ourselves. And then once you hit send, it'll bring us back to our signing section of our transaction. There's the name of the signing right there. I can click on the name of it. It's going to come up and I can view the information that's here. I can see who the participants are. Under individual forms and certificates, because we haven't sent it off, it's just the original. And on the history, it shows when we created it, and the last thing is when it was sent to that first participant. So we'll come back and look at the signing details in a little bit here. So if you've sent it, now you want to go check your email. So I'm going to bring up my person's email here, and remember I'm going to go through this twice. So we'll do it once on our computer, and then I'll do it once on my phone so you can see how that would look. But when you go check your email, you should have an email address with whatever the subject is. Mine says, Willie, here are your forms. And then they click on Start Signing to sign. If they've signed before in AuthentiSign, it'll remember who they are. If they're signing for the first time, they're going to have to go in and choose their font, but they only have to do that once. And I'll bring it up on mine so we can see it as well. So they have to accept the participant acknowledgement, and you'll notice because I've signed before, I don't have to do anything else. I can just hit start. But if they wanted to change their font, then go over here to options on the right, and then where it says change signature, they can change it. Now maybe we want this one to be caveat that looks like a handwritten one or something. But it always has remember my signature checked, so the next time they won't have to do this. And then once they hit set signature, they can just start clicking to add their initials and signatures. Now, before we finish it, we're at 16 of 19 here. Just to show you what you can see, I'm going to go back here to Instanet. Now I'm going to click on the name of the signing, and now it shows that Willie is authenticated but not approved everything because we haven't finished signing it yet. But I can come here and see that the process has been started. So now we'll finish signing the RA25 here, complete signing, and then we're done. Now, if you're using the signing order, then the subsequent people, if they download their copy before it's completed, they'll see the people who signed before them. If you're not using the signing order, they won't see that. All right, so I can make sure I get my signing up here. Now my phone has a stylus. They don't have to use a stylus. They can use their finger. All right, so here we go. Charity, please sign these forms. Start signing. Again, if they've signed before, it's going to recognize them. If they're signing the first time, they'll have to add their signature. But just like before, I can come here to options and change signature, and we'll re-enter this here. And then again, they just hit start and stop and start adding their signature everywhere. Because they're on their mobile device, if they want to pinch and zoom to view something, they definitely can do that. But as soon as they tap to add their initial or signature, it's going to zoom back out and move them. So we'll get this one completed. And then there is the signature. And then complete signing. And then that person has signed. Questions on the process of the signing for the signer? I mean, I shouldn't say a lot of people, many people have used electronic signing. So whether it's AuthentiSign or something else, they've done that. I mean, my wife and I had to change the payment date on our car payment. I reached out to the lender. They didn't say, hey, Chris, do you know how to do electronic signing? How tech savvy are you? First thing they offered up was, well, let me send you a document and you can sign electronically to change that. And so that's what they did. And so a lot of people are used to doing this and they expect that you're doing it all the time. And so it's definitely worth offering to your clients because they're going to be more than likely familiar with it. Now you'll notice back here on the signing, it says completed. And when I mouse over the participants, it's got check marks next to their name. If I click on the name of the signing, now I can see they both authenticated and approved. If I go to individual forms and certificates, now I've got original signed certificate copy to cloud. On the history, it shows the last thing was the signing was completed. Up at the top, I can view the PDFs, the certificates. I can go to copy to cloud. I can forward this to someone else. Under more, I can duplicate it. I can delete it. And then we talked about earlier that when you do a signing in a transaction, when I go over here to documents, now you'll notice I've got offer 01 right here. So when you go to documents, whatever the name of your signing was, it's going to be here. And then you can view all the signed documents and then the certificates are there as well. So I could come here, select the property disclosure and the RE21, click on the shopping basket to email those, and I could email those as attachments to the listing agent and send my offer right from my transaction. So then in my transaction history, not only do I have everything that I've done on my side, I've got when I sent it to the listing agent as well to send them the offer. Then this is what the email looks like that everyone gets. The signers, you get a copy of it. So back here in their email, there's a new email that says signing complete. So when they click on the signing complete, it's got some links they can click on to download a copy of the documents, the certificates. Those links automatically expire after a week. But the signed documents are also attached to the signing, to the email. So they have attachments there. So I'm going to click on the link to view those documents. And because it was one signing, everything's one document, even though technically it's 3 different forms. So there's the RE14 with the signatures and initials. The RE21 with the initials on the bottom and then the signatures on the last page. And then we've got the RE25 with their initials on the bottom right. And then the signatures on the last page. Questions, comments, concerns about Authentisign or Instanet or any of the things that we've talked about this morning? That's good to hear. As you're using Instanet, if you have questions, obviously you can reach out to us. But we're only here 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday. So even using the weekends, if you come here to the little circle on the bottom right, mine has a light bulb. I've seen other ones that look different. But you click on the circle and go here to support. They have 24/7 support via phone you can call. They also have, you can email them, you can chat with someone. They also have a community where they have information and release notes. Then they have training information available with videos and live and recorded webinars you can participate in. So there's a lot of resources available if you have questions or want some information about using Instanet and Authentisign. And obviously you can reach out to us as well. All right, thanks for coming, guys. Have a great afternoon.